Hello, and welcome to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. In this podcast, we explore and dive into the stress-filled world of high conflict divorce and relationships. We offer solutions to calm your world down and allow for greater positive engagement with your children and the people around you. If you find value in this commercial and advertising-free podcast, please consider donating by pressing the donate button so we can continue our helpful work. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. This week, my special guest is attorney Julie Mack. Welcome, Julie.
Hello. Thanks for having me today, Brooke.
Julie is a mediator extraordinaire, and what we're here to do today is really talk about mediating in high conflict. And this has been a subject that I've been engaged in for many, many years. And my experience along this area is a lot of people think that you can't mediate high conflict. And my contention has always been that unless it's an extreme case, and I mean really extreme, where there's child abuse or severe domestic violence or a lot of addiction issues or things like this, we can really get in and we can do a lot of good work here. It just requires some particular skill sets for the mediators, particularly, and then for the participants to have, I think, somebody in the background that can help them navigate this, where they're not just going along something in a process that they don't really understand. So what I want to do is open the conversation with you, Julie, about how we create the baseline for entering into this and how we can start to get some really good traction in the mediation realm. And when I opened this conversation with you about doing this podcast, you had some things that you really wanted to talk about that I think are really good setup points for us to continue. And the first conversation that I want to enter into this with is what is high conflict? What constitutes a high conflict case that we're going to actually start to talk about? And I've got my own ideas, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, it's funny because, as a professionals who work in the divorce world, we see a lot of our clients who think their case is high conflict, but it's not. It just, to us, it looks like your ordinary type of stress in a difficult situation. So what is high conflict to me is really when there are personalities at play that people do not have the ability necessarily to be reasonable and rational in a way that you would expect them to be able to make decisions, see the other person's side, and come up with a joint shared goals, for example. I mean, there's just people who are incapable of doing that ever. And most of their spouses will know that, and they're afraid to go into mediation because of that fear that the person's not going to be reasonable, not going to be listened, is going to dominate the conversation. But there's a lot of in between, like people who just have stress or maybe some types of anger issues, or just people who don't communicate well and they think they're high conflict. Those are not high conflict. Those are just your run-of-the-mill cases that we can help people feel like maybe a little more normal as they go through this process. But when you're really dealing with the people who are driven in litigation and maybe trying to get out of that or avoid that because the intensity of that conflict will exasperate any types of personality traits that lead towards conflict, it just gets exasperated in the court system. Mediation can temper that a little bit, but those personality traits are still going to be there. So high conflict to me is really people who there is something about their makeup or their history or traumas that they've had or whatever it is in their background that makes them unable to interact with other people in a way that's productive and healthy on a regular basis.
So I totally agree with that. I want to come in and I want to talk about the stress piece about this a little bit because, high conflict personalities, if we're talking about personality disorders, are one thing. And within that arena of itself, stress drives it harder. Stress drives all of this harder. And if we don't have a set way to approach that and downregulate that stress response, we're going to really get lost in the weeds with all of that.
Oh, yeah.
But for this other group of people that you're talking about that aren't the high conflict personalities, they've just got these traits that get pushed in the relationship or in the divorce, the separation, the custody conversations. When they really start to express that high conflict piece, when they really aren't over the threshold, this is a stress-driven piece, and the stress is coming from whatever the separation is, the worry about the children, the worry about the finance, whatever those pieces are. And it can drive that person to or over threshold to the point where they're actually in that zone of being in that high conflict personality. So if we can set the parameters for all of the discussions and how we go about that and help them down regulate the situation as a whole, we can keep them below threshold. And from there, we can get a lot more done, I think.
That's definitely one of the goals. And I think that's one of the benefits of mediation for high conflict couples or somebody who thinks that their situation is high conflict, is that with a skilled mediator, you actually have the opportunity to deal with those personality traits and the conflict in a much more manageable way than you can with attorneys who are not trained, or a legal system in front of a judge who doesn't even know what these traits are, doesn't know you from Adam, like they don't know anything. So I actually think that mediation as a process is almost better for a lot of people who are on that borderline of whether something is high conflict.
And I would suggest, even when it's over that threshold, to the extent that you've got the proper professionals involved in the conversation that can keep this from going. I know that, I do a lot of coaching for people in this arena, and the coaching that I do is to help them keep themselves under threshold, to keep them in that place of being open to the conversation, and to not push fast, not to stress fast, to take one piece at a time, to gather the components that create the final document that's needed to, and not try to do it all at once. Because, whether we're doing this in litigation or we're doing this in mediation, there's a huge expense that's involved. And some people have this notion that if I take this into litigation, I'm going to get it done faster. And that is so not true, because there's waiting time, and there's this brewing time for more anxiety, and there's this opportunity to just get caught in. So, but I have people come to me and they say, well, I'm 6 or 7 mediations in, and I still am doing this, and it's costing me $2,000 or $3,000 a copy to get this done. And I go, well, yes. And with all of the stuff that you're looking at, if you want to take this and litigate this, and you're going to pay an attorney, you're going to be 40 or 50,000 or 60,000 or more into this process, and you still don't know that you're going to get it done. So let's try to find our way. And my experience is, if I've got a good mediator in the middle of this, and I've helped my client vet this out to and directed them in the place to have this, that their outcomes are usually pretty decent.
Well, they are. In fact, I've litigated and mediated cases for 25 years, right? And so I can tell pretty much when a case comes in and I have all the information I need, like where the end results, like what the range is for an end result. It's not that much different in litigation versus mediation. It just takes a lot less time and money to get there, usually through mediation. I think there's a misunderstanding among the general community, and even among a lot of my colleagues as family law attorneys, as to what mediation is. Mediation is just a process. If you have to get divorced, you have a couple processes to choose from. You can choose mediation, you can choose collaborative divorce, you can choose to hire attorneys and go to court, you can choose to do it yourself with the help of the facilitator sometimes. It's just a process. And some have, for me, in mediations inherently better because of the control that the parties maintain over their timeline, their assets, their children. Nobody else takes away decision-making from them. But mediation, a lot of my colleagues even think you can't do mediation unless everybody gets along, that this is some session where we all sing kumbaya and whatever. It's not. It's not therapy. It's just a process that you can have a facilitated conversation about assets, debts, children, support by somebody who's skilled to do that and get you divorced. Like, that's the process. It's all the nuances about people's personalities that make it more challenging sometimes.
Yeah. And I think the notion of mediation in this is we're not separate in the conversation. We've got somebody who is facilitating a back and forth rather than when we are in litigation. And what so many attorneys are either incapable of, inept at, or just don't want to do is creating a conversation of how do we reach a common ground agreement in this, and not having a couple of negative advocates hammering their own arguments for their own egotistical process to have a win-lose situation. And I've always believed in any situation that we're pressing for a win-win here.
Yeah, even on my website, I've had on there for years that divorce is not about winning a legal battle, right? Like, you're mitigating losses in divorce. It's about restructuring your assets. And people don't understand that. I've been at trials where technically, I guess I could say I won that trial for my client, but my client didn't feel really happy about that at the end of the day because of the acrimony and the money and the stress it took to get to that outcome, right? It doesn't feel like a win. Mediation, win-win is a great goal, but mostly it's just, how do we restructure our lives to move forward and make sure that we're each going to be okay? What can we live with in a situation that sucks? I mean, divorce sucks, right? Like, divorce is not fun for anybody to go through. If you're dealing with high conflict in the divorce, it's going to be more stressful. It's going to be a more difficult process, but it doesn't have to be the nightmare that people think it's going to be. And that really depends on who's going to be driving that process for you. I mean, I could imagine there's a lot of mediators who have not had any experience with high conflict couples. A lot of them are not even attorneys, or they don't know how to function with people who are in the middle of high conflict in front of them. It's stressful for the mediator. And in those situations, those high conflict personalities are going to rule the session. They're going to take over the session. It's going to feel unproductive. It's going to feel horrible for one of the parties, at least, maybe good for the one driving the conflict. So it's on us as professionals in this field, as you know, to understand what these personality dynamics are like, to understand what drives stress, what drives conflict in the course of litigation and divorces and relationships. I mean, people forget, attorneys forget that this is an emotional experience. This is a human experience to have people dissolving their marriages, right? It's not just a legal thing. They're humans.
They're dissolving their marriages, and they're moving into sharing their children.
Yeah.
And it's not just a financial movement of reallocating assets and doing that. We're really restructuring the family dynamics between the parents and the children. And I think one of the things that drives the litigative piece so much is, these perspectives that are really fear-based and fear-driven, that the other parent doesn't know how to parent, that they don't know how to keep the children safe because that's never been their role. And this isn't just moms to dads, this is dads to moms, and all of these different dynamics that these perceptions come into. And we're talking about what components do we need to bring into a mediation to mitigate those fears, those pieces that are driving the high conflict, particularly because my true belief around any level of conflict, high conflict, medium conflict, low conflict, when it comes to really all of these factors, is it's a fear-driven piece.
Of course.
And if we can talk to that fear, if we can bring in components to mitigate those fears rather than have this, they're all bad or they're all good or they're all whatever they are, then we can start to help them say, okay, this person sees what's going on and they're not just dismissing my fear, but they're giving me an answer to it. They're giving me a program that we can go through step by step to reach an agreement. So we have these things in place, whether it's addiction, whether it's poor parenting, whatever it is. People have the capacity to change, or they don't.
True.
And they're going to show us their capacity to change by their willingness to engage.
Mm-hmm.
And we can really start to see that when we're mediating as mediators. And if they don't have that willingness to change, if we truly understand the personality disorder baselines, we can start to language that in a way that we can pull them in. Or
Yes.
we can language that in a way that pushes them away.
Well, that's true.
And that's where the nuance here happens, I think, in the high conflict.
I think the fear is a big issue because, fear, it's such our reptilian brain portion of us, right? Like if you're in a fight or flight mode, you're scared about your livelihood. You're scared about your kid. You're scared about where you're going to be living. You've lost your identity as a spouse or a mom or a dad or whatever you felt in your family relationship. There's really nothing more traumatic than having that completely disrupted, right? Like your identity and your family. So when a person's looking at the fear, like they're acting in fear, it's going to show up something different. Nobody comes in our office and says, I'm just really scared. Like some people do, but usually it's reflected as anger, or like anger is the most common. Well, I'm just really mad, or these things happen. And like, the attorneys have said this person my spouse did this. They're so angry and they're calling them on the phone. And what do I do about this? In mediation, we have the chance to see both sides interacting, right? Like if you call your attorney and not in mediation, you say, this is what this person did. Attorneys aren't trained to minimize conflict. Attorneys are trained to pick up a sword and act as your champion to go fight a battle for you. That's what we're trained in law school to do. That's what litigators think they're supposed to do. We don't look at this as a transactional relationship. So when you exasperate your client's fear by fighting for them, like you're not helping the situation. When somebody understands the way humans work with their fear, I can have clients who come in my office. I can tell that they're terrified. They're lashing out in anger or something, but it's really just fear. I have the ability to ask a lot of questions. And in high conflict situations, you want to ask a lot of questions of the clients because it gives the ability for them to give their story, to talk to you, to diffuse some of the fear as they see somebody listening to them. Like those are all important things to do in minimizing conflict. And you've probably seen that too. And like as you're coaching people through this, you probably help them address their fears.
Well, I think that's the first place I come to. It's like, I get where you're afraid. I get where you're angry. I get why you're angry. But I want to go into how that services you to get out of this and move on, so you're not stuck here. But also in the long term, I want my clients, as they come out of this, to come out of this whole. I want them to be in a place of agency where they can begin to move forward in their world and really be focused where they need to be focused. And if they're focused on their fear of the other parent, or they're focused on just being in this habitual, and it really is oftentimes just a habitual cycle of conflict, then they're not taking care of what needs to be taken care of. And with my clients, it's mostly 99.9% of my clients is about custody. And that means their focus isn't on the child. And the interesting thing that I find is that they think it is.
Of course.
And to take and really be able to flip that on them and show them where they are doing more damage than good in that process and give them the tools to move over is one of the things that helps them in a mediation arena of creating solutions within the agreement that are going to help them move out of their affair and move forward.
Well, definitely. But that takes a lot of work, right? That's something that's it's hard to do in the heat of a mediation in front of your spouse. So when my clients who are in mediation have coaches that they're working with or attorneys who are trained to help people through mediation, it's really beneficial because then they can talk through their worries or concerns. They can be planning for what negotiating points are most important in mediation. They can get out some of those fears and be ready to have the dialogue. So it helps immensely when somebody can be coached through this process. And I think with high conflict cases, it's especially true to have that coaching outside of the mediation itself to help prepare people to make it more productive.
It is so important to get our clients out of content and into process. So
yes,
they are not all activated about the noise that's going on, but we've got them clued into the signal of what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And if they can do that outside of the mediation time that's set aside for that, when they go into mediation, that mediation becomes more productive.
absolutely.
It's not about you did this or you did that or whatever. Even if the other side hasn't done their work on this, they're able to stay on point. And what I coach my clients to, and good coaches that do this and good attorneys that do this, are able to teach their clients how to just sit there and let that flow until we can get that dissipated enough to come into the conversation again without jumping in and being reactive to it. And that is so hard for people because their physiology, the non-voluntary piece of fight and flight is so at agency in that moment. And to be able to sit and go, okay, I hear you. I got it. All right. Okay, now I can move. It's hard.
My former business partner, Sean Weber, and I both had this thing that we would do in our office when we were mediating cases back in person, when everybody did everything in person, is I would always have food out, like just little snacks. And people who are in a fight or flight mode, they are not hungry. They're not going to be grabbing almonds and pieces of chocolate. It doesn't happen. So as we're having the conversation, I'm asking questions, I'm starting the process. As soon as I see somebody reaching for a snack, I know that their brain has shifted and we can talk about issues. And so mediators who are dealing with people in conflict and people in fear, like every single person who comes to us in the divorce world, we need to have some kind of tricks and tools to help people stay calm or to notice when something's going to happen, to have keywords we can use with our clients to mitigate the conflict when it's arising. You know, breakout rooms are great. The fact that people are not always in the same room anymore, like doing video conferencing, is really, really helpful for high conflict couples because they don't have to be in the same room. It's a different energy. So there's tools that we can use to mitigate the conflict. It's not going to go away. There's going to be conflict, and a high conflict dynamic between a couple is going to remain high conflict during a divorce. Like, things don't usually get easier while you're going through a traumatic, difficult experience of divorce, but it can be managed if you have the tools to do it. And, you know, we might want to talk a little bit about, like, how does a mediator do that? What can a client look for? What can a client do to help the situation? Because it's really, if these high conflict people make the mediation super high conflict and the mediator does not know how to deal with that, you're just going to replay the whole history of your marriage sitting there in a mediator's office, and you're going to go around in circles just like you did when you were married.
So you bring up a really important conversation, and I've talked about this a little bit in the past on a couple of my podcasts, but how do you vet a mediator? because everybody that you go in and you interview thinks that they understand how to do this stuff. And my contention, my strong contention in this is at least as I see it, there is a very, very, very small percentage of professionals that truly get this, that have the chops to sit in a room with people that have got this level of intensity about it and not get lost. I mean, I know for me, I know this stuff. But when I'm sitting in a room mediating, which I don't do anymore, I'd much rather help coach people through it. But when I've been in a room and mediating this stuff, my system, if I'm not really careful, is getting charged. And I'm constantly having to come back in and take control of the room and set good boundaries and set a example for how we're going to do this. And for a good mediator, and this is why I love talking to you about this, and I love sending my clients to you about this, is because you've got this quality of being able to be really self-reflective and self-regulating.
Oh, thank you. It's hard. It takes a lot of years to develop that. And I think what I realize is none of the stuff that my clients bring into my office is about me. Right. None of it. So I don't have to take anything personally. You know, I remind my clients sometimes, they have triggers with each other, 10, 20 years of the fights that they've had of, I know they're fighting about something about a car. And I know it's really about like what somebody's mother said about the other party 10 years ago at a birthday party that they'll never forget their spouse for. So, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that I wasn't involved with, right? Like that's not my life. So I have the ability to sit there and be completely neutral and not judgmental about what brought them to my office. And that allows me to not take anything personally. So even if I've got an angry client who's telling me all the things I'm doing wrong and everything's going wrong in life, and this is all so stupid, like it's not about me. I don't take it personally. I can sit and be reflective and say, okay, what do I need to do to shift gears to help move these two to the next level? And it's exhausting. My colleagues who don't do mediation and think somehow that litigation is really, really tough and mediation is just, this is hard work, and you've got to be skilled and trained and never stop training and learning how to do it better, because people are getting harder and harder to deal with right now. I guess you've probably noticed that too.
So let me ask you a question along those lines, Julie. Did you always have the skill set?
The concept?
Well, no, the skill set.
Oh, the skill? No, of course not.
Right, exactly. This is something that you've worked at for years, not just as a mediator because this is what you do, or not just as an attorney because this is what you do professionally, but as a human being that's interested in self-improvement and doing things better across all spectrums of your life.
That's true.
Right. And this is, I think if somebody is looking for a mediator, as personal as that may sound to them as a question, I want to know my mediator's history. I want to know why they're doing what they're doing. I want to know their personal work. I want to know if they've got a meditative practice. I want to know what their thoughts about mindfulness are. I want to know what their knowledge about their own process is. And then and only then am I even interested in the further conversation of whether I want them as a mediator. Because I really truly believe that without that ongoing curiosity and self-exploration as a practitioner, as a professional, that if we're not on that cutting edge of our own process all the time, we're going to fail our clients.
Absolutely. And another thing is we got to let our egos go a little bit, right? The process of mediation, I may be the mediator, I may be controlling the room or whatever, but it's not about me. at the end of the day, none of the stuff that's written up for this contract is about me. It's about the lives of the people that I'm trying to help. So I'm always trying to do it better. I'm always trying to learn, like, what's going to be the best step for this couple. I'm paying attention for the entire 2 or 3 hours that I'm with a couple, what's going well, what's not. I'm picking up on all the clues of how they speak. I'm looking at their body language. I'm watching people react as certain things are said. I know how to ask questions. So instead of telling people what to do, like, we want to problem solve, right? We, as attorneys, mediators, we want to solve people's problems. That's why they come to us. But sometimes we can't just jump in and do that. We have to be willing to say, okay, let me get more information so that I can help guide people to make their own decisions and solve their own problems, right? And that takes a curiosity. When you said curiosity, I got all excited because it really is about staying curious as to humans, as to human behavior, what's driving things, and staying curious as to how we can be good facilitators of the process for them.
So along the lines of curiosity, I'm interested in, do you ask about your client's history, not just with the other parent, but their family of origin history?
I usually don't, just because I don't want to cross the lines into therapy. I mean, I'm through something, and I used to do, litigation and consulting. I would ask more questions about that. But in a mediation session, I don't use that as one of my tools necessarily. But I will ask for things like, if people say, let's say that they are talking about something that the other person did, or they're really angry, I might stop and ask questions about it. Well, what is it that made you so upset about that? Or what was the ramifications of that action? What was it that was so disturbing for your family? What, to ask questions. When I don't know what to do, I ask questions.
The curiosity is really important piece, but here's why I do it. It's not about therapy. And I know that you've got an understanding of personality development, all of this stuff, because of the conversations that we've had. And I think as a mediator, that rudimental understanding is critical to a good mediator's ability to handle high conflict or medium conflict situations. And the reason that I would bring that in is it gives me an insight to their perspective. It gives me an insight as to where they're coming from and where their perspectives and their belief systems were developed from.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to go back and do therapy with them. I just want to know, hey, what'd your dad do? What'd your mom do? Where were you in the family? What were your major traumas in your life? Because personality stuff is developed around trauma. And if we're working, and I think this is something that you and I haven't talked about that I really want to bring in to an important piece for mediators that do this work is, are they trauma informed? Do they really know how trauma drives this stuff and how to navigate that arena with their client? And that's why I would be asking those types of questions as a mediator.
Yeah, it's funny because, especially the field of family law, we went to law school. Family law attorneys and mediators, we went to law school. They didn't teach us about how family dynamics will lead to the way we make decisions as adults, and our traumas, the way that our traumas can stop us from emotionally developing at the time that trauma occurs. Like I have a social work and psychology background. My major undergrad is in sociology. I studied family systems and child development. Like that's my love, right? Like on the weekends, I'm reading about marriage and family systems and how to make things better for families and what do couples go through in divorce. Like I don't care about the legal stuff. I know how to put evidence in front of a trial. Like I don't care. I want to know why my clients are fighting about money, right? I want to know I wish I could ask, what's your family of origin? How'd they deal with money? I can sit and probably solve most people's money problems if they were able to explore and understand each other on how their family of origin impacted their fears and relationship with money. Like you just nailed it. Like that's going to dictate that. And so I have a lot of couples who they don't hear each other. They're arguing in my mediations and they're saying things and the other person's not even hearing what they say. And I can say, wait, time out. What do you think Steve just said to you, Mary? And they'll tell me these words. And I'm like, Steve, is that what you said? I didn't say anything like that. I'm like, because I didn't hear anything like that. And it's fascinating to me.
And I think that if we keep tuning this in and we keep finding nuance in this, Julie, that these are some of the openings that are good for mediators that are listening to this, for clients to take to their mediators, to ask questions around. But this is interesting that we're here. In my podcast 2 weeks ago, I think it's 186 or 187. I have a setup. It's just a meditation and an exploration of what is driving you and what is driving the other parent. And it's an in-depth exploration internally to begin to understand what the stressors are for the other parent, not for me, but for the other parent. And it's a somatic and visceral exploration. And to your point, when we can get that into the room,
oh yeah,
that is a game changer for them, because then they can understand, okay, that's where they've come from. You know, when I'm working with my clients, I'm really honestly trying to find out what they know about the other parent's family of origin, where they came from and what happened. So I can talk to them about what those drivers are. And my wonderment is, as you and I are having this conversation, is I know that, at least I think I know this about your practices, is that you meet with these people individually before you meet with them together. You gather information.
I actually don't do that. I get information from them, but it's something that a lot of mediators do. And I've actually considered doing that in my practice for some people, but I meet with the clients. I have a process in our intake process where people call my office, they talk to my paralegal, she gets background information, and she sets up what I call a meet and greet, so that I have the ability, before I ever get into a mediation session with my clients, I usually have had a 15-minute, 20-minute interaction with them on Zoom by video. I see how they interact with each other during that call. I see how they interact with me. It gives them a chance to ask me questions. I can ask them questions. Like that's very, very helpful to have some involvement with the clients before they come in for the first session. But the benefit of doing those individual sessions with people is that the mediator gets just that person. Like they get to hear their goals. They can work with that person as to being ready for mediation. And I think it's very helpful.
Now, that's something
probably something I should do.
Well, that was something that I always used to do. So when I was in the room with them, I knew that they knew what I knew, and that there was a different perspective in the room to some degree. So that was one of the things that I wanted to bring in and ask you about, because that was one of the things that I feel, especially from somebody like yourself that has a psychology background, somebody like Bill Eddy, who has that both sides of the coin, that they can look at, you know, the legal piece and the psychological piece and blend them, is so important. And what we're trying to do in mediation is funnel these people to a agreement.
Yes.
And the more tools that we've got, the more information that we've got, and the more that we've been able to let these people be heard without vitriol in the room, is helpful. Because what our clients are trying to do, let's face it, is they're trying to get us to side with them and see their view.
Sure.
And it gives them an opportunity to think that they've maybe done a little bit of that. And when we can come to that from a neutral point, I think it helps drive it a little bit more.
Now, one of the things I've noticed about high conflict cases, or something that can make it high conflict, is one party has some absolute need to have a person agree with them. Like they want me to be on their side, right? And when that they're trying to convince me of how wrong the other person is and how wrong all their behavior is and all these things that they did. And I just don't let myself get sucked into that. And I remind people all the time, because one party will be telling me the story and the other person will jump in right away. That's not true. It happened this other way. And I stop them. Time out, guys. I said, the two of you are going to have very different narratives about this incident, very different narratives about your parenting, very different narratives about your lives in general. And I'm not here to decide which of those narratives is correct. I don't need to know which one's correct or what actually happened. I want both of you to have your perceptions, and that's okay. We're going to find a solution or a resolution that doesn't rely on either of those perceptions. Just trust me to get you guys there. I don't have to believe one of them.
Would you say that what we're really trying to get to in this is setting up bumper guards for them to be able to move forward?
Sometimes you are. I mean, I've had clients who they disagree about everything. They don't trust each other. Every proposal that's put out by one party, the other person assumes that that proposal is made for the sole purpose of trying to screw them. And they can't even reflect on the whole picture of anything, because they're so convinced that the other person's just trying to wrong them. And they're afraid that me as a mediator, I'm not getting that, right? Like I'm not understanding that. It's those personality issues are fun in our job, but we have to move people past it, and we have to remind them of the goals that they're seeking. And that is they need to get some sort of an agreement so that they can move forward with their lives. And most people, not all, do agree that having some closure around issues will make it easier to move forward. Not all. Some want to hold on to whatever they can.
So that brings me to, I think, what'll be the last topic or question that I want to talk about with you today, Julie. And that is the parenting plan. And what, one of the things that I see post decision-making piece, once this has been done, that the parenting plan has been put together in a way that doesn't address the things that need to be addressed, and it actually causes more high conflict down the road. It causes more conflict and more, because it's not concise, it's ambiguous, it's not clear in arenas, or it's addressed stuff that maybe doesn't normally get addressed in non-high conflict situations, or non-high or medium conflict situations. And one of the things that I try to direct my coaching towards when they're trying to get it is to make sure that, even as triggering as it might be in the process, and it might take a little bit longer to get there, to make sure that these pieces are addressed in a part of that document going forward. And what I see come out of some of these documents that have been done before, and now people are back in litigation because they're arguing over this stuff. And it used to be, and here in San Diego, Family Court Services has gotten a lot better about it. There's a few things that they still miss, but we can't aim for perfection in this. But to slow things down and to really make sure that the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, that there's not ambiguity in the holiday plan and the transition plans and everything that goes on to that. But also to get more concise about travel and not have that come up later, have that come up now. What are the parameters that we're going to put into local travel, country travel, out of country travel, and and how that gets addressed with passports and some of these other things. But there's so much that I think many mediators miss in the details that needs to go into this that actually end up causing more problems later. You have any thoughts about that?
Well, so I agree with you. And that's why the mediator has to be able to determine a little bit when they're dealing with their clients, how much specificity is needed in those agreements. Because I mean, I'm lucky. Half the clients that I work with, they're never going to have a single co-parenting dispute. Like they get along marvelously for their children. And their marital settlement agreements can say, we'll share the kids and holidays by agreement. That's like 50% of my clients, usually with teenagers. And that happens. So I have to be really careful that I don't assume all my clients are going to be that way, right? And so I ask questions. Well, have you thought about what to do on the holidays? Have you thought about what to do on vacations? What type of notice do you want? Do you want to know if your kids are leaving San Diego County overnight, or do you not care unless they're going to be on an airplane and going across the country? Like, I'm a parent. I co-parented my teenager with my ex-husband. I don't care if he spends a night in Riverside on his weekend with her. Like, what do I care? It doesn't matter to me. But I have some parents who need to know that. They want to know where their kids are. They want to know who are their kids staying with. But I would want to know if my kid was on an airplane flying to another state. Like, I would just want to know that as a general courtesy. And also I remind couples that when they're making their parenting plan and they're kind of fresh with their separation and they're still trying to be nice to each other, or they don't want to think about things because it's too scary sometimes, I remind them that they're looking at something in the future, and that one of you may have somebody involved with you in your life, like a new partner, that's not as accommodating, or you may want to plan in advance and not be able to communicate at that time with the other parent. So would it make sense to have a default plan? Have you talked about vacations? How are you going to structure your vacations? What is the notice that you feel comfortable giving? And you've got to ask questions as to what they want to include, because a lot of them haven't even thought about it.
Right.
But then there are cases where everything has to be spelled out, like decision-making or keeping kids in a certain school. Like, you've got to itemize everything to take away the possibility for interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes it's the parental interaction that becomes contentious, and just even the invitation for more talking about things will lead to more problems. So if you have a set schedule, if the kids are dropped off here at 5 o'clock, mom picks them up in the morning at 8 o'clock, and then dad drops them off at different time, like all these things, they don't have to communicate about it.
And the communication back and forth is oftentimes that impetus for the conflict to roll up. So I want to counter you a little bit in the discussion about how detailed does it need to be, because I think, and again, this is just my perspective given what I do over on this side.
Yeah.
My contention is that if everything is spelled out, specifically specified to every detail that's in there, you never have to come back. There's a default in there. And then if you can do something other than that, if it's a free flow and you want to go outside of that, knock yourself out. Go enjoy. But when I'm writing a parenting plan for somebody, or I'm helping them put their parenting plan together, I want everything in it. I'm going to dump the kitchen sink into that son of a bitch. And that's going to give them the option to, if this is working, you don't have to do this. But if it blows out, we've already addressed it.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a safety net. It's a default if you can't come up with an agreement.
Right.
And it can be helpful. There are some couples who can deal with the financial issues in their divorce pretty early on, but they can't really talk about the specifics of parenting plans. And they're not ready. And so you can do those in parts. You could do like an agreement up what we're going to do for now, and then you can come back and you can fine tune that. I work with a lot of couples who are just at the very, very, very beginning of separating. And in fact, a lot of them still live together when they come to me. And they don't even know what's going to work. So I encourage them to try some things, see what it's like to live separately, see what that plan's going to be and what they might not be thinking of that might become a problem. And so if I work with the family, let's say over the course of 6 months, they might not know something in January, but by April, they've seen where there might be a problem. And by June, they're looking ahead saying, okay, we've got holidays coming up and summer, and maybe we do need to have some more specificity. So there are people who I can help negotiate a very, very, very solid, detailed plan. And then I'm also willing to take people where they're at. Like, not all my clients are ready to do that. And I'm not going to force it on them, but I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to ask questions so that it can percolate in their minds as they go through the process to be thinking about it. We send lists of holidays. Not everybody celebrates the same holidays. I ask people, what are important in your family that you always celebrate that might not be on this holiday list? What can we think about now to avoid problems in the future?
So what do you see, given, even that early stuff where people are not really sure of where they're at or where they're going, regardless of the level of conflict that they're in, as they're going through this process of hiring and having a coach to help them get those pieces together early on, to at least have them in exploration of it before or during the process of mediation?
Well, it's incredibly helpful because then people aren't thinking on the fly. A lot of people don't do well making decisions instantly or being able to think through things under stress with their spouse in a mediation session. They really need time to let those things percolate. So speaking with a coach or your child's therapist or whatever about what might work as a schedule and what should I be thinking about, it just helps them be more prepared for that discussion with their spouse when they're in my office. Mm-hmm. So there's no downside to coaching. The more people can get help with this process, the better. But I do think that, there's people who are really good with finances for coaching and telling you what to do about money. It takes a very different skill set for people to talk about parenting, because the emotions that get tied up with your parenting and your identity and your time with the kids and the family changes that is so hard for so many people to cope with in the thrust of a divorce. The more help they can get from that therapeutic type, child specialist type background, I find very, very helpful.
Well, thank you for joining me in this, Julie. It's always a delight to see you and have these conversations. We'll have you back again. We'll enjoy some more of this conversation, I hope. And for our listeners, this has been a conversation about mediating high conflict, and even more than that, just mediation in general. Thank you for your continued listenership. Keep coming back every week. We'll be here as often as we can keep showing up. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for having me, Brooke.
Brooke, people don't have to wait until Friday mornings to get more content. If this is something that's helpful for them, right? This isn't the first time you've broadcast anything or recorded anything or put anything out there in the world. What are the other ways people can get the help more aggressively or speed up their recovery process? What materials are available for people right now?
Well, I've written a book called The Black Hole of High Conflict, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle.
Great.
And everything that we're talking about is really compressed and put into there. So this is a really good starter place to get in and get your mind working and to see what these concepts are about and how to start to apply them. The other place that I think that is valuable is to go to our website and look at some of the blog articles that I've written. Those are available there as well. If they go into some of these other arenas, and that's at www.highconflict.net. So the book, the website are also really good places to get the material. And also we have classes. We have high conflict diversion program classes that you can get into and get some one-on-one help with this as well.
And you know me, I'm aggressive. Whatever I want to become good at or learn, I find someone who's good at it and pay them and hire them and shorten my learning curve. What if somebody just wants your help? Somebody says, Brooke has this information. He's good at something I'm not good at yet, and I want to work with him. Do you have any type of coaching or consultations or anything like that?
Absolutely, I do. I do one-on-one coaching for custody cases. I help people get ready for family court services. If you've got that in your community, I work with attorneys and clients to help them with managing and strategically setting them up to have more successful cases as well.
And how do they reach out? You want them to just go to the website or email or phone, or what's the best way for them to reach out, raise their hand, and say, I need some help?
They can email me. My direct email is brooke@highconflict.net. That's BROOK at highconflict, HIGH, conflict.net.
Perfect. That's everything everybody would need to get some help, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brooke.